What have we got today? Well, today we have a Diax IIa camera, which I got recently, and it's got problems. Fancy that. Let's get it out of its case. Now, this camera came to me as a body only, which is fine because I had a standard lens sitting aside, all waiting and ready to match up with a camera body when one turned up. So what's its problem? Well, its headline problem is the shutter. You can see it's got a bit of a lack there. One of the blades is missing. And the description ran like this. Contour shutter, silkily smooth all speeds but has a dropped blade, see pics, which is saved for the repair job. One tiny rivet. I thought, hang on a minute, there are no rivets in these shutter blades, so what's going on here? We'll have to find out. One thing I notice, the shutter is loose on the body. Potentially, or looking more closely at it, you can see that the shutter is loose. The mechanism plate is not firmly fixed to the outer case. So I think that basically it's just moved a little bit. The blade has probably just fallen off its pivot and dropped out. Of course, I have to find out. I'm going to remove the shutter from the camera. Let's see if I can get the back open. I never remember which of those letters is open and closed because it has an A and a Z, or a Z for you Americans. I never remember which one's open and closed. Right, let's have a look at this body. The shutter is held into the body with 4 screws. Visible here, here, here and here. So I'll remove those screws and I expect the shutter to come off the front of the camera body. Of course, it's that dark down there. I can't really see what I'm doing. And the screws are very tight. I'm going to put a little drop of acetone on those screw heads. They may have been touched up with paint and are therefore firmly glued in place. Of course, this won't do the surrounding paint any good, but we'll deal with that little issue afterwards. There's just a little drop of acetone. And I'll try again with the screwdriver. That screw I can see quite well. I'm holding lots of downward pressure on that screwdriver. And that screw came out without a great fight. The next one. Same deal, lots of downward pressure on the screwdriver. Turning the screwdriver with the other hand, the screw comes out. Screw number 3. That one was not tight. Which only leaves screw number 4, which I think is where I came in. Right, that's all 4 screws removed. I'll lift the shutter from the front of the body. This is the piece that cocks the shutter. That's coupled to the film advance knob. And here is our shutter release, which is coupled to the shaft here on the shutter release button. So I'll put that body to one side and bring the shutter back into the picture. So there are 4 screws that hold the mechanism plate into the case. These 4 here. See, that's loose. So I've got a full turn on that one. 3/4 of a turn on that one. Half, 1, 1.5, 2. Nearly 2.5 turns on that screw. And this one's also loose. Half, 1, 1.5, 2. 2 turns on that screw. So those screws were loose. That is almost certainly what's allowed that blade to fall out. You can see that the blade's got a bit of a corroded look about them there. They're certainly going to need polishing. In an ideal world you'd replace those, but of course I don't have any replacement blades. So the shutter apart. Okay. Well, here we have the coupling pin for the rangefinder. I think that'll just pull straight out. No, it doesn't want to, so it must have a bit of a step on it up here. There's a tiny screw that I'll need to loosen. Not convinced about the state of that screwdriver. However, it does work. And then this little knob, the little button itself, is screwed onto the shaft. Okay, I have to put that carefully to one side. I don't dare lose that tiny lock screw. And now the rangefinder pin will come out. It has got a step on it. It wouldn't have pulled through. Okay, the outer case here, this chrome plated shield. Let's have that off. I think this is held in with 3 screws normally, and very commonly screws are missing, so we've got 1 screw. Two. No, 3 screws it's normally held with, and it had 2 of them. The shutter itself, getting into this. Okay. You'll see that there are 2 holes in this front plate to engage a tool. This ring is screwed into the mechanism plate and it holds our lens mount here in place. These are typically quite tight. This one's not. You can see I didn't even need to use a friction tool to get that loose. That is exceptionally fortunate. I'll just get a wooden toothpick and unscrew that the rest of the way. Now be cautious with this because there's probably a plastic spacer washer shim underneath it, and you don't want to make a mess of it if you can avoid it. And you will make a mess of it if you poke a sharp tool into these holes and make it and just start turning. You should try and unscrew that ring with a friction tool before doing anything else. In this case, I didn't need to even do that. Okay, well, there's a fair bit of thread engagement with that. You can see how many threads run into that mount. Okay, so this plate comes off the front. Now here is that plastic shim that I told you about. It's very thin in this case. They're probably in different thicknesses. You can't even see it here. Here. Not even sure you can even see that. That's a thin plastic shim. That will have been used to help adjust for focus irregularities, because an interchangeable lens camera, you need some way of ensuring that the distance between the lens mount and the film plane remains a set standard distance so that you can use your interchangeable lenses without that being a problem. Okay, so from the front, well, you can probably see there's a lot of dirt here. It's grit and dirt, and I'm just going to brush all that off the front of that shutter. Now the front plate, like most of these Contour shutters, Contour types, that bayonet's on to the mechanism plate and it's locked in position with a little rivet here. There's two small holes in it to engage a tool, and fortunately somewhere here I have a suitable tool. See if I can find the right one. That's a bit wide. It's a bit narrow. Not that one. Not that one. Not that one. Ooh. Let's try this one. That's not a good fit either. I'll search around further. Back shortly. This tool will do the job. That's one that I made some time ago. I've got a video on how to make special screwdrivers. I just need to rotate that 180 degrees to disengage that little rivet and slide this round until the bayonet tabs are lined up. It should lift off. There's a bit of dirt and rubbish here. It's preventing it lifting off easily. I'll see if I can pry underneath the edge of it with a scalpel. Okay, that's it. I don't know why this is so tight. There may be a bit of grit there. It may be that this front lip has been slightly rolled over. Anyway, there's our front plate off. You can see how dirty and greasy that is. The shutter certainly needs to be serviced. I'll remove this ring. This is the speed settings cam plate. That's quite tight. Again, that sort of points to this front lip being a little bit spread out. Okay, we're into the shutter here. This is our setting lever, called the main lever, and that's got a return spring on it, hooked over a post. Where do they hide it on this one? Under here, I think. There's a bit of rust in this shutter, probably from all the grit and rubbish that's got in there. Okay, let's see about getting this main lever off. Right, its main spring is actually tucked in down here. See if I can lift this off. Now this little tab here, be cautious of that. That sets the self-timer or the delay action. And the arm on it will swing out and get caught under there and stop you being able to do anything. I can see the spring I want is here on that post. I'll see if I can unhook it. Yep, I was able to unhook that, so now I can lift this main lever off. Just make sure it's not caught under anything. Okay, here's our main lever. There's the spring I was talking about, and the post that spring was hooked over was where? Down here somewhere. Right, let's carry on with this disassembly. The shutter release lever here has a little return spring on it. That little return spring hooks over. I'm going to remove one of these levers first, I think, so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to remove this lever. It has a little return spring of its own which hooks onto that post. I'll unhook that spring so it's not under tension. I'll remove this lever. And you can see the main shutter release lever here. See how that return spring on it hooks around that little post. So I'll unhook that. That should lift off its post now. This piece here, that does the delay for the flash sync. That's what allows you to have the X and M sync for your flash. Where X fires the flash bulb at the max, or your electronic flash these days, at the point where the blades are fully open. The other setting actually fires the flash before the shutter starts to open. That's to allow the bulb to reach peak brilliance and be burning at peak brilliance during the exposure. And that was quite important because bulbs took a certain measurable length of time to actually ignite and burn up to peak brilliance. Unlike electronic flashes where it's all over practically instantaneously for all we care. Now let's have a look at this. I'm going to remove this. So I'm going to start here by removing this little catch on the end. Now there's a spring on that catch. It hooks into the end of the lever here, and the other end of the spring is tucked underneath. If you're taking apart a shutter like this, take lots of photos of the process, and that way you'll be able to see exactly where things are hooked on. Okay. This spring here, this heavy spring, is the detent for our little green lever. And that's the switch that changes your flash sync from one setting to the other. This plate is held on by a single screw at this end. And at this end we've got a post that you can use a screwdriver of this sort on to unscrew it. Now one of my tools here will do that job quite well. But I'm not sure which one it is. Well, this one actually fit that screw. That's the one. It'd be nice if all of those clever screw posts like that had the same pitch, but they don't. Here's that little green lever. Let's lift this top plate off. That was our flash contact. I'll show you where that's at. That was the detent spring for our green lever. This flash contact. Where did that sit? No, it sat right there. It's got a little bush on the top which actually supports the plate. And the contact sits in this position. So there's this comes across, it pulls that down and makes the contact. And likewise, when you set it to the M sync, it actually bridges that contact before you get to that point. Now we'll take our flash contact out. This spring here, this big spring, is our 500th of a second spring. That's what gives you the extra power to make the flash fire at 1/500th of a second. Now there's a little post here we need to bring out, that little platform. You notice the flat side stays up, not the round side. The round side goes down. There's a return spring on the arm here hooked over a plate. We need to unhook that return spring. Now take note of the position, the relative position of these two components. The angles, take a photo of it. Make sure that when you put it back together they go back in the same orientation. Otherwise the flash sync mechanism will not run down correctly. I'll unhook that spring. Now from memory that's a bit of a tricky one to get off that post because there's not much room behind it. Yes, it's proving so again. That's it. Some of these components are probably easier put into the shutter while the shutter's disassembled. Anyway, that's off. This will come off, and the wheel, is the wheel going to come off on here, or is it fixed to the plate? On the smaller shutters that wheel can move. This one here appears to be fixed to the plate. That's okay, we don't need to take it out then. The flash contact here, our fixed contact, single screw, which is loose. Now loose screw seems to be a pattern with this shutter. If you see a lot of that, if you've got a camera that's all the screws appear to be loose, it probably means that the camera was in somewhere where it got a lot of vibration perhaps, or a lot of temperature cycling, hot and cold, or both. I've seen cameras that were taken on motorcycle holidays and just the vibration in the pannier bags was enough to shake every screw loose in the camera. Okay, this spring here is what returns our lever, and that lever in turn returns our blade actuating ring, which swings the blades in and out. Let's open up this shutter case. 4 screws, all of which were loose to varying degrees. And after this, we'll be able to see whether I'm correct and that blade fell out just because the screws were loose, or whether there is actually something broken. No, it looks like everything is there. That's the only pivot for a blade. Let's get this blade out of its little plastic container, and it would sit right there. So we have our 5 blades. There are no missing or broken rivets, and all I'll need to do is remove all those shutter blades, clean everything, clean the mechanism plate, and we can get it back together. Now there's no diaphragm in the case. That's because the diaphragm forms part of the lens assembly with these cameras, which is common for most interchangeable lens cameras. Okay, so let's have a look at this. The blades are normally put in a certain order. Sometimes blades are a special shape for the first blade or the last blade or some other blade, typically where a shaft goes through the shutter. I'm just looking to see if there's anything odd here going on. This is blade number 1, blade 2, blade 3, blade 4. Yeah, these blades are not correctly placed. Let's have them out. Yeah, 2 of these blades. Let's get them all out. Most of the blades are plain. The tip of them is just flat. It's just flat with the blade. 2 of the blades have a little turn up on the tip. You might see it right on the tip if you can get it to catch the light. Yeah, like that. So that blade, the tip is turned up this way. And there should be another one here where the tip turns the other way. I think it probably should have been that one. No, it looks like it's flat. And the idea of the blades with their tips turned up is just so that they'll skate over the top of the other components without catching on anything. Alright, so we've got our blades. They're uniformly filthy. This is the blade actuating ring. This is the part that swings backwards and forwards, and as it does so, the blades pivot on this post and swing out or swing back in. The blade actuating ring is worked by this lever. This lever has its return spring, which snaps the blades back into the closed position. It sits like that. So the shutter mechanism pulls this open and then allows it to drop back closed again. This is all very sticky. There's a single screw here at the middle of that lever, the pivot point. Now you may find a shim washer under there or not. If there is one, it needs to go back. If there's not one, don't worry about it. Never had one. Take that lever off. You can see it's pretty grimy. That brings us down to our mechanism plate. Let's take these screws out. 1, 2, 3 screws hold the cover plate on. These are possibly loose, we'll find out. Now the screws may or may not be the same length. So take note of which screw came out of each of the 3 positions. Let's tip them out and see what they look like. That's a little wee short one. So is that. And this is the longer one. The longest screw in this case is on this speed train. That speed train is our self-timer. Lift that plate off. That's very grimy. This is probably graphite grease that's been put on there. You really don't need much lubrication at that point. And here's our blade actuating ring. And here we have the mechanism plate. You can see it's pretty grimy. That's going to need a good clean. That I will clean with naphtha. And I will do that manually, I think. In an ideal world, this speed train you can probably take off its post. I don't think that's adjustable for its position, so you could unscrew it there. That's another one of those useful little posts with a notch either side. Single screw at that end. This is our speed train. This regulates the shutter speeds. Now, the reason I'm not going to take that off the mechanism plate to clean it is quite simple. Getting this correctly back in the right place and adjusted so that the speeds work correctly on a compor or compor rapid or early synchro compor of this design is difficult. It's tedious. And there's every likelihood, in fact 99 times out of 100, if it was in the correct place previously and you clean it all nice and thoroughly, the shutter blade, the shutter speeds will work correctly when you put the shutter back together. But if you disturb it in an effort to do a more thorough job of cleaning it, you've got the fight of getting it back in the correct position. So I just don't, I clean it in place. So anyway, that shutter is now in little pieces. Our plate here, normally there's nothing you'd need to do with this. I'm going to remove these screws, take that plate off. This is probably where the shutter blade came loose. You can see there's a few marks there with something skated across that. I want to clean that plate, clean the inside of the case underneath it, and I can best do that by removing that and cleaning all this manually, because everything is very, very dirty. So there should be 3 screws. I think in this case that they're all the same. And the screws are not equally spaced. So there's only one way you can put that plate back in, really. Sometimes you will see that people, when they've previously repaired something, have put marks across a plate like that to show where it lines up. But really there's not much need for this, because there's no way you can put it in the wrong way, more or less. There's little dimples here. They sit over the shutter blade pivots. Just so they sit upwards. As you have the case like that, you'll see those little dimples. And here we have just this single plate in the back of the case. Now, even if you're not taking these apart to clean them, and I recommend that you do, check that those screws are tight, because if they loosen up, the screws can back up off the plate and then the shutter blades will catch on them. If the shutter blades catch on them, of course, the shutter doesn't work. So with this filthy mess, I'm going to start cleaning it.